Translators to the Reader. Part 7. St. Augustine was not afraid to exhort St. Jerome to a palinodia or reconsideration. The same St. Augustine was not ashamed to retract, we might say, revoke, many things he had written, and even boasts of seeing his own weaknesses. If we are to be loyal to the truth, we must be attentive to what it says and disregard our own interests and other men's too, if either stand in the way. So much for principles. Now, to the accusers themselves, we would say that of all people they have the least right to raise the charge. For how many different editions do they have, and how many alterations have they made, not only in their service books, manuals, and breviaries, but also in their Latin translation? The service book attributed to St. Ambrose, Officium Ambrosianum, had been in use and in great demand for a long while when Pope Adrian called a council with the aid of Charles the Emperor, and not only abolished it, but had it burnt, and commanded the service book of St. Gregory to be used universally. Then, after the Officium Gregorianum is recognized as the authorized text, does it escape change or alteration? No, the Roman service itself was in two forms, the new form and the old. The one was used in some churches, and the other in others, as the Romanist Pamelius notes in his preface to Microlygus. The same Pamelius cites Rodulphus de Rivo to the effect that about AD 1277 Pope Nicholas III removed earlier service books from the churches of Rome and introduced the use of the friars' Minorites' missals, commanding them to be observed there, so that when Rodulphus happened to be in Rome about 100 years later, he found all the books to be new, of the new edition. Nor was this shifting back and forth done only in earlier times, but it has happened recently also. Pius V himself admits that almost every bishopric had its own kind of service, unlike the ones which others had. This moved him to abolish all the other breviaries, however ancient, privileged, and published by bishops in their dioceses, and to establish and ratify only the one which he himself published in the year 1568. Now, when the father of their church, who would gladly heal the sore of the daughter of his people gently and easily, and make the best of it, finds so much fault with them for their differences and inconsistencies, we hope the children have no great reason to boast of their uniformity. But the differences that appear among our translations and our frequent corrections of them is what we are charged with specifically. Let us see, therefore, whether they themselves are without fault in this respect, if it is a fault to make corrections, and whether they are qualified to throw stones at us. They that are less healthy themselves ought not point out the infirmities of others. Horace. If we should tell them that Valla, Lefebvre d'Etaples, Erasmus, and Vives found fault with their Vulgate version, and consequently wished that either it should be corrected or a new version should be made, they would probably answer that we produced their enemies as witnesses against them. Yet they were no more enemies than St. Paul was to the Galatians for telling them the truth. If only they had dared tell them more plainly and oftener. But what will they say to the fact that Pope Leo X, by his apostolic letter and bull, sanctioned Erasmus's translation of the New Testament, which differs so much from the Vulgate, and that the same Leo encouraged Pagninus to translate the whole Bible and provided all the expenses necessary for the work? Surely, as the Apostle reasons to the Hebrews 7.11, 8.7, if the former law and testament had been sufficient, there would have been no need of another. Similarly, if the old Vulgate had been completely adequate, there would be little reason to go to the labor and expense of preparing a new version. If they argue that this was only one pope's private opinion and that he consulted only himself, then we can go further and demonstrate that many more of their leaders, including their own champions at the Council of Trent, Pava and Vega, and their own inquisitors, Hieronymus of Bolastro, and their own Bishop Isidorus Clarius, and their own Cardinal Thomas of Vio-Cajadon, either make new translations themselves, or follow new ones that others have made, or note defects in the Vulgate version, without any fear of dissenting from it or disagreeing with it. And do they claim to represent a consistency of text and of judgment about the text, when so many of their own worthies disclaim the currently accepted opinion? But let us be more explicit. Does their Paris edition not differ from the Louvain edition, and Hentinius's edition differ from both, and yet all of them are sanctioned by ecclesiastical authority? And does Sixtus V not admit that some Catholics, he means some of his own persuasion, were so eagerly making translations of the Scriptures into Latin that although they did not intend it, Satan could exploit the opportunity to show that such a variety of translations is confusing and proves that nothing seems to be left certain and firm in them, etc. And further, did the same Sixtus not ordain by an inviolable decree, with the counsel and consent of his cardinals, that the Latin edition of the Old and New Testaments, which the Council of Trent pronounces to be authoritative, is precisely the one which he then published in a carefully corrected edition, printed by the Vatican Press? Sixtus states this in the preface to his Bible. And yet Clement VIII, his immediate successor, publishes another edition of the Bible, containing innumerable differences from that of Sixtus, many of which are weighty and substantial, and this edition is declared absolutely authoritative. If this is not an example of vacillating with the faith of our glorious Lord Jesus Christ, what is? What kind of sweet harmony and consistency is this? Therefore, as Demaratus of Corinth advised the great King Philip of Macedon, before criticizing the dissensions among the Greeks, he should settle his own domestic broils, for at that time his queen and his son and heir were in a deadly feud with him. So when our enemies are making so many different versions themselves and debating their value and authority, they cannot fairly challenge our right to revise and correct. The purpose of the translators, their procedures and principles. But now we should show briefly what we proposed for ourselves and what procedures we followed in our review and study of the Bible. Truly, good Christian reader, we never thought from the beginning that we should need to make a new translation, or even to make a bad one into a good one, for then the criticism of Sixtus had been partly true, that our people had been fed with snake venom instead of wine, with whey instead of milk, but to make a good one better, or out of many good ones to make one principal good one, not justly to be objected to. This has been our endeavor, our goal. End of Part 7.